that Henk de Zeeuw is a senior advisor at RUAF Foundation in the Netherlands. He was the previous director, actually. When I worked with him 25 years ago, I was telling him that the difference is he hasn't changed and I have, but I'm very pleased to see you back here. He has an extensive knowledge of urban agriculture in Europe, but across the world, not only Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, but Asia and other parts, which is very important, because that's where you can compare models, you can compare successes and bring the best practices. And he has, as you would see from the biodata, detailed biodata you have in your folder, he has published extensive books and a new knowledge around the world on the different systems of urban agriculture. So we are very pleased that you give us this overview. You will have a bit more time than the others, but please, yes, do what you can in due time. Thank you very much, Henk.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. When we started with the RUAF Foundation and we asked officials in various countries, how do you understand urban agriculture? They normally would say to us, it's an informal, small-scale activity mainly done by women, very low productive, marginal lands, not very important for city to take into account, and moreover we don't have a mandate in food security, etc., so we don't bother about it. Or it is forbidden, or we might allow it just informally. So as was already presented earlier, urban agriculture is very diverse. It's both within the city as in the peri-urban area. It's on agricultural land, but you can also do it on hard surfaces, indoors, on rooftops. It can be micro, small scale, low tech, as well as very large scale and high tech forms of urban agriculture. It can be socially oriented, as well as semi-commercial or fully commercial enterprises. Might be individual enterprises or cooperatives, other forms. It includes production as well as processing, distribution and waste management. And it is about food as well as providing social and ecological services to the city, the urban population. So, knowing this broad character of urban agriculture, some 6 years ago, we started more to think and talk in terms of a city-region agro-food systems. It's urban agriculture, because it's often understood only as small-scale, intra-urban, etc., is misleading. It's much more than that. So, better to think in terms of city-region food systems. But for this meeting, urban agriculture was the key word, so I'll keep talking about urban agriculture. The first question normally is how many people are involved in urban agriculture, to see how important it is. When you look into the various surveys that have been done in the last 10 years, then you will see that in most cities, 20 to 30% of the population is involved in urban agriculture in one way or other. But in some cities, it might rise up to 80 or 90%. So the variation between cities is very high, especially in Africa. When you look into the land used by urban agriculture, you will see that a surprisingly 11% of all irrigated cropland is within the urban boundaries. And when you look at a circle of 20 kilometers around cities, then even 60% of all irrigated cropland is in that margin. So that indicates already the importance of city planning regarding agriculture in the country. The next question is, what role can urban agriculture play in answering key urban challenges? A number of them have already been mentioned. Growing food insecurity and malnutrition in cities, growing urban poverty and social exclusion, increasing impacts of climate change on cities and population, growing freshwater scarcity. It was in the news recently in various cities. They have to close down water supply because there is not enough anymore. And growing waste management problems. So what role might urban agriculture play in helping the city to overcome this kind of problems? Let's look at first food security and nutrition. Urban agriculture is very important in the supply of fresh, nutritious food to the city. So when you talk about fresh green vegetables, about milk, eggs, but also poultry meat and pork, if you combine all the figures that are available at the moment, then you get this kind of figure, that vegetables, 30 to 75% is produced within the city region. For eggs and poultry meat and milk, it's even more. When you collect all data about the amount of food produced within the city region, so not just fresh vegetables, but what percentage of total food consumption is produced within the city, you will see that 5 to 15% of total urban food consumption comes from the city region. And when FAO asked this question to the cities, they didn't define urban. So most cities will have answered within the built-up city. So if you include the peri-urban agriculture, then probably this figure will rise to 20, 25, or even 30% in some cities. What was already mentioned this morning, that urban agriculture also enhances the access of urban poor to affordable and nutritious food. They do have food, although very cheap food, very bad quality food. So if we can raise the affordability of more nutritious food by making it more accessible, close by produced, it is important to most of the urban poor. And urban agriculture reduces the vulnerability of the whole city, of the food system of the whole city. By having food produced close to the city, you are less vulnerable for disturbances in the supply chain from the rural areas or from harbors in case of conflicts, price hikes, damaged infrastructure due to floods or droughts or whatever. Now let's turn to jobs and income. I already mentioned that in Africa, in most cities, at least 20 to 30% of the urban population is involved in urban agriculture. When we look how much income do they get from it next to food, then it is about a quarter to two-thirds of their income. That's for all involved. So for special groups, it might be much higher. And we come to that later on. When you go to peri-urban agriculture, even the traditional types of horticulture around the city, then in average they earn more than the minimum wage level. And the World Bank analyzed different sectors in cities in Africa, and what came out as the fastest growing and most profitable sector is urban horticulture and dairy. So it's not only important in terms of food security and all that, but also for economic growth and job creation. So far we talked about food production, but there is an enormous multiplier effect. Each dollar invested in urban food production will have 1.4 up to 2.6 effect on incomes in food-related enterprises. So in transport, in processing, in compost production for urban agriculture, etc., etc. When you know that normally in rural agriculture this is about 1.4, 1.5, you see that urban agriculture in average creates much more jobs and income in food-related enterprises. Now about the urban environment. Originally it was not much discussed, but the last 5 years it gets growing attention and is very highly valued in a lot of cities. First, urban agriculture can help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the city. By producing fresh food close to the city, you will use less energy in transport, in cooling, in packaging, and transporting it to the city. In Almere, is a city in Holland. You see it on the right corner. They made a city planning including enough horticulture and arable farming to feed 20% of the population. And that resulted in a reduction of 16 million kilometers of transport and a reduction in energy equal to the energy consumption of 11,000 households a year. So by including urban agriculture in their city development plan, they had an enormous effect on greenhouse gas emissions and energy use. Now things are going wrong. Yeah. By enhancing the vegetation cover and green roofs in the city, also less energy will be required for cooling and more CO2 will be captured within the city. We did a city in Kesbewa, that's a city in Sri Lanka, and we found that the temperature in green areas in and around the city is 7 degrees lower than in the built-up city. So by greening, you can have an enormous effect on temperatures. In Durban, we did a study on the roof temperature. The temperature of a green roof at the end of the day is half of a normal roof. So from 41, it went down to 22 degrees of Celsius. So that has a strong impact on all the energy used in that same house underneath. And by using composted urban agriculture, less methane emissions will be obtained from landfills, and accordingly less energy used for production and transport of fertilizers. In Dhaka, we did a study, and that reduced each ton of organic waste composted resulted in half a ton of greenhouse gas emissions reduced, and a reduction of 25 to 30% of use of chemicals. So these are substantial effects. Urban agriculture also helps to reduce the effects of climate change by reducing runoff and enhance the storage and infiltration of excess stormwater. In New York, after studies, they concluded that green infrastructure is the most important and most cost-effective way to manage stormwater. So now they use funds for the water and sewer infrastructure funds to invest in green infrastructure, in agroforestry, in agriculture, in order to improve stormwater management from the city. So in other areas like Freetown and Antananarivo, they have used urban agriculture to maintain flood zones free of housing, free of construction. And by doing that, they prevent high damages on housing and people living in those low areas. The same in Lima, they used it for agroforestry on steep slopes to reduce erosion and prevent landslides, and by that the effects of climate change were reduced. Urban agriculture also helps to reduce the pressure on freshwater sources. In Amman, it's a very scarce of freshwater sources. They use now a very high percentage of wastewater produced in the city to irrigate cropland, fruits, vegetables, and fodder crops around the city, up to 12,000 hectares now. So that feeds a large part of the city. And in some cities, they use urban agriculture, agroecological areas to clean up contaminated water and land. Around Kampala, you have a very large wetland, which has a very important role in bioremediation of water streams. Hazelwood is an example of a city that reclaimed 132 hectares of industrial land by planting agroforestry crops and trees in that field for a number of years and then harvested it, and they could build houses on it now. I think this is the most well-known one. Urban agriculture helps to include vulnerable groups, women without husband, with children, people without pension, handicapped people. A lot of cities have special projects for this kind of groups in order to include them and to provide them some food and income. Community development, especially in northern cities, but also in southern countries, urban agriculture projects can help to clean up derelict zones and to create a new image in the neighborhood and a new drive to improve. Most cities have groups of different socio-cultural backgrounds that have their own preferred foods. Often that kind of food is not available in the supermarkets, so allowing them to grow their own food or having groups to grow that for them is very important for certain categories of the population. And more important is the role of green spaces, also agriculture spaces for recreation. People growing for themselves for leisure, farms opening up to create space for recreation on farm, etc. So knowing all this, a lot of cities have started to build programs, projects, plans, policies to develop urban agriculture in a sustainable and safe way. I try to pull together our most important lessons and shortly present it. These are all at city level. Of course, there also needs to be done something at national level. For instance, in Kenya, cities have waited for a very long time for national government to open up the possibility for them to work in this area. They were not allowed to do that. Now, 2 years ago, there is a National Urban Agriculture Act, and Nairobi is now planning their urban agriculture policy. So there's also a role for national government, but this focuses on cities. Very important is to create an institutional home for urban agriculture. Often it's nowhere. So to have a coordinating department or unit or whatever, and to have an departmental working group. It is already mentioned, it cannot be done by one sector alone. It is a multi-sectoral issue that has to be looked into by a group that includes health, agriculture, parks, social development, economic development, etc. And especially spatial planning. Establish a multi-stakeholder forum involving the main actors included in food systems is key. And that should include formal and informal sector. To jointly map and analyze what is going on in the agri-food system in the city region. Who is farming where, who is processing what, how is transport going, and what are the problems in each of these activities, and what are the options to do about it. To develop a shared vision on the desired development of the local food system. There are different interests, there are different views. To have that discussion and to come to a shared vision in 15 years, where should we go with our local food system? What are the goals? What are the changes we want to realize? And based on that, define a multi-annual strategic plan. How can we go there? What are the means and ways we will use? And remove ungrounded legal limitations on urban agriculture. For instance, in cities, people want to start rooftop agriculture, and there are a lot of possibilities. If you map available space in rooftops in some cities, you end up in an incredible amount of space. But it couldn't be used because rooftop agriculture is forbidden in a lot of cities. So to open up is very important. Enhance access to land for urban agriculture. first realize that urban agriculture is legitimate urban land use, develop a spatial vision, what kind of agriculture we want to develop where. Don't allow pig raising next to a water source. That's creating problems. But other types of urban agriculture might well fit in over there, agroforestry, ecological farming, etc. Integrate urban agriculture into master and land use plans. There are a lot of examples. Dar es Salaam is one of them. Protect prime agriculture land in and around the city. Still, a lot of urban development is going on unplanned, undirected, and mainly in prime agricultural land. That land should be preserved. It's very crucial for the whole food system in the next decades. Map vacant open spaces for urban agriculture in the city. There is often much more open space than planners and policymakers think. It's never been recorded and analyzed for use in urban agriculture. And that includes indoor open spaces, old offices, old factories that are not used anymore for their original purpose. Make municipal land that is vacant available for urban agriculture groups or small entrepreneurs. Reuse of factories, including UPA in social housing and slum upgrading projects. Very important. It might be full smell. One example is Cape Town, where they are rebuilding slum areas by building 2-store shacks in place for 1-store shacks. And that already creates a lot of open space that can be used for other uses. Urban farmers are often not organized, so helping them to organize themselves and to have a voice at municipal level is very important. Provide training, not only technical training, but also more on the entrepreneurial side, the marketing side, etc. Provide them very essential means, especially for poverty groups. It's very important to have minimal access to water, seed and compost and tools. For groups that are more market-oriented, access to credit, access to markets is much more important. So providing that kind of opportunities is essential. Help SMEs to start up. So a lot of small-scale enterprises have problems to get proper licenses. There are all kinds of difficult ways to obtain. Just to make it simple and the procedure short can help urban farmers already. Preferential food procurement by city agencies is a very powerful tool. So not just buy the cheapest food that you can get in the market as a city agency for your canteens and for school feeding program, but buy food from urban farmers preferential. And support research into appropriate technologies for urban agriculture. They need to farm in special conditions. People are nearby. They might be using wastewater, so you have to find safe ways to use that safely. You have to be more aware of the effects on the urban population. Support resource recovery, also from the freshwater perspective, but also to reclaim nutrients included in organic waste and urine. There is a lot of literature and experience now in how to do that cost effectively at local level. One of our partners is the International Water Management Institute. They have a lot of literature on it. It can be done. Recovery of methane from landfills to generate energy and heat for greenhouses. The use of excess heat and CO2 in cooling water and byproducts from industry and other urban sources. I think this is a very special and important area for the coming years. There is a lot of excess energy and heat and water in the city that is not used. It's just spoiled. And urban agriculture can absorb that kind of things and use it positively. In Amsterdam, they are now making a new pipeline between the harbor area and the industry there and a complex of greenhouses to heat the greenhouses and use the CO2 from that industrial area in that complex, in food production. Collection of stormwater from surrounding roofs for use in UPA, but also look into the health and environmental risks associated with urban agriculture. If you just leave it without complementary measures, you might have problems. So first, assure better coordination between health, agriculture and environment. Make an adequate zoning of different types of urban agriculture where they are allowed in the city and where you prefer not to have them because of the effects they might have, or how others might affect them, below industry streams. Farmer education, but also food vendors and consumers. We once did a study in Accra, and food was polluted more in the retail than by the farmers. So training retailers, food vendors, street food sellers, how to handle food safely is very important. Prevent land and water pollution by industry. It's a very difficult area, but it should be done, otherwise you have problems in future. Just to conclude, there is already a lot of attention also now in international agenda. There was some mention already from the Milan Pact. The new Urban Agenda 2016 of the United Nations also includes urban food production and processing. And there is already a lot of experience to learn from. There are documented approaches, tools, policies, monitoring frameworks, training opportunities in this field of work. Just to mention 3 resources you might use. So the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is now signed by 165 mayors already, and they are committed to apply that in their cities. So if you want examples, just go there and pick one of those 165 to learn from. The FAO Food for the Cities program assists countries and cities to improve the urban food system. Of course, they need then that the country is asking for it, and a bilateral agency that supports it in order to finance, co-finance. And the ICLEI RUAF City Food, ICLEI is a cities network, cooperates with RUAF in the City Food program, where cities exchange experience among themselves and support each other, but also can get support from RUAF and ICLEI if they need so. So if you really want to share directly with other cities, this might be an opportunity to join. If you want more information on RUAF and what we have done, please go to the website and you will find our magazine and our publications. Thank you very much.
Thank you.